We thought our 17-year-old needed tough love, so we moved 2 states away without telling them and left a note saying, "You'll figure it out." 12 years later, they've built a successful life without us and are refusing any contact. Now everyone is blaming us for losing our child. My son Tyler was 17 when everything happened. He's 29 now. We haven't had a real conversation in over a decade. And yes, that's because of something my husband Mark and I did. Something that, at the time, we convinced ourselves was tough love. Something everyone now calls abandonment. Tyler was difficult. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. He skipped school constantly. He refused to get out of bed before noon on weekends. His grades were plummeting. He snapped at me, rolled his eyes, slammed doors. We'd get calls from the school about missing assignments or skipped classes, and Tyler always had some excuse. He was either sick or done with pointless homework. He insisted the teachers didn't like him. Mark grew up in a strict household and he'd mutter, "Kids today are so soft," every time Tyler argued back. It wasn't just behavior. Tyler barely ate some days. Other days he'd stress eat everything in the fridge. He slept too much. He looked pale and tired all the time. Now I can see maybe it was depression, but back then I honestly thought he was being dramatic. I had grown up with no-nonsense parents who taught me you got up, went to school, did your work, and didn't make excuses. When you struggled, you pushed through it. That's how I lived. That's how Mark lived. We thought that was parenting. A counselor at school suggested family therapy after one particularly bad meeting where Tyler refused to talk at all. Mark scoffed and said, "He needs consequences, not a cozy little pity party." I let him bulldoze the conversation because at the time I agreed. I felt like Tyler was spiraling and dragging us into it, and we were the ones bending over backward while he did nothing. I was exhausted and frustrated and honestly embarrassed by how chaotic our home had become. Right around that period, my job offered a transfer. Same role, better pay, but in a different state. Mark was immediately on board. He hated our town and said a fresh start might shock Tyler into growing up. At first I assumed we'd bring Tyler with us. It wasn't even a question. But the more Mark talked about it, the more he pushed this idea that Tyler needed to learn responsibility without us there, cushioning everything. He said, "He's almost 18. He wants to act like an adult? Let's treat him like one." It sounds unbelievable when I type it out. I know that. But at the time, we built this echo chamber between the two of us where everything we said reinforced the next thing. I was tired. I felt like I had been parenting alone emotionally because Mark had this my way or nothing attitude. I resented Tyler. And when you sit in resentment long enough, you start rationalizing things you should never rationalize. We planned the move in secret. We waited until a school day when he'd be gone for hours. We packed up the entire house. I left his room untouched for the most part. Clothes, bed, basic things. But everything of ours was gone. That should have been the moment I stopped. Seeing his empty space next to our packed boxes should have snapped me out of it. Instead, I swallowed the guilt and kept packing. I wrote a note on the kitchen counter. I can still picture the exact spot where I left it. "We can't support this behavior anymore. You're almost an adult. You'll figure it out." That was it. We told ourselves it was direct and honest. We left 3 months of prepaid rent, $300 cash, and the car with the keys on the hook. The car's registration was expired, but again, we convinced ourselves it was no big deal. He'd grow up, handle it, take responsibility, sink or swim. I expected him to call crying or angry. I expected him to lash out and then beg us to come back. I imagined some dramatic moment where he admitted he'd been wrong all along. That call never came. We reached the new state within 8 hours and still heard nothing. The next day, nothing. The next week, nothing. Mark said he was playing chicken with us. I pretended to believe that, but I checked my phone constantly and felt sick every time the screen lit up because it was never him. Almost a month later, a neighbor texted me saying she hadn't seen Tyler around and thought he'd moved out. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I told myself this was exactly what we wanted. He was making his own choices. He was figuring it out. I didn't drive back. I didn't try to track him. I told myself he was fine. Fast forward 12 years, Tyler is successful. More successful than I ever imagined. He owns a condo. He works in tech. He volunteers at a youth shelter. He has friends, mentors, a life built from the ground up, a life that has nothing to do with us. He has completely no contact. Not low contact. Not minimal. Nothing. I only hear about milestones through extended relatives. My cousin sent me a screenshot last week of Tyler's engagement announcement. I wasn't invited. I didn't even know he was dating anyone seriously. When I mentioned it to my sister, she said, "What did you expect? You walked out on him." That word, walked out, made something in me snap. I said we gave him tough love. We gave him space to grow. We thought we were giving him a chance to become an adult. She said, "You abandoned your kid, Dana. That's not tough love." Now half the family won't talk to us. The ones who will talk only call to criticize. Even Mark is getting blasted by his brothers. Everyone says we're abusive, cruel, heartless. I keep saying we did what we thought was right, because we did. We genuinely believed it. But now I'm looking at the fact that I have a son who has built a stable, healthy, independent life while cutting me out completely. He didn't need us. He didn't want us back. Not once. I'm heartbroken, I'm confused, I'm angry, and I'm ashamed. But I'm also asking the question honestly. Is it fair that one parenting decision cost us our child forever? I need outside perspective because inside my family, the verdict has already been decided. Update 1. I didn't expect to be back so soon, but everything in the last week has knocked the wind out of me. I thought I understood the situation when I wrote the original post. I thought I had a grip on the consequences. I had no idea. The backlash from my family was nothing compared to what showed up in my mailbox 2 days after I posted. A letter. A real handwritten letter addressed only to me. Not to Mark. Not to Mom and Dad. Just Dana. My first instinct was that it had to be from someone else. Tyler hasn't contacted me directly since he was 17. We've had a few indirect exchanges over the years, information passed through relatives or old family friends, but nothing with my name handwritten on it. It was from him. I recognized the handwriting immediately, even though it looked more confident and mature than I remembered. I opened it in the kitchen while Mark was watching TV. The first line felt like someone punched me in the chest. "You didn't give me tough love. You gave up on me." I must have read that sentence 20 times because it didn't feel real. I had told myself for 12 years that what we did was harsh but necessary, that we were parenting the way our parents had parented us, that we were doing it for his own good. Seeing him call it giving up hit me in a way I wasn't prepared for. The letter didn't stop there. He laid out a full timeline of what happened after we left. Couch surfing with classmates whose parents barely tolerated having him there. Sleeping in his car for a week after a neighbor complained. Working 2 part-time jobs at the same time because he had no one to fall back on. Dropping out of school because he couldn't balance work and classes. Later earning his GED on his own. Not because we pushed him, but because he pushed himself. He wrote that he dealt with suicidal thoughts during that period, thoughts he never told anyone about. A teacher eventually stepped in, offering a couch and later connecting him with programs that helped get him into tech training. And then the line that gutted me more than anything. I didn't reach out because I don't talk to people who leave me behind. I sat there at the table with this letter in my shaking hands, unable to breathe. I kept reading it over and over until the words blurred. It wasn't angry. There were no insults or accusations. It was just straightforward, clear, final. It was the tone of someone who had already healed without me and wanted me to understand why I wasn't part of that healing. When I finally handed the letter to Mark, he skimmed it once and said, "He's being dramatic. He always exaggerated." I don't know what changed in me, but something snapped. Hearing him dismiss Tyler's pain like that made me realize how much of our parenting had been filtered through his inability to acknowledge emotional reality. I told him he needed to actually read the letter instead of brushing it off, and he shrugged like it was a grocery list. It was the first time I looked at him and felt disgust instead of partnership. 2 days later, another blow landed. CPS records. My sister sent me a scanned copy she got from a friend who works in administration. Apparently, a neighbor had reported that Tyler was living alone at 17 with no guardians present. The state opened a file briefly, but because we had already moved and left no forwarding address, they closed it without reaching us. They didn't even know who to contact. Tyler was a kid, living alone, a legal minor, and the state couldn't find his parents because we had packed up and left without giving anyone our new location. I always told myself he wasn't at risk. He was almost an adult. He was surviving. But that file made it obvious that we weren't the only ones who saw the situation as abandonment. When I called my sister to ask why she sent it, she didn't hold back. She said she had been waiting 12 years to say it to my face. "You were cruel, Dana. You left a suicidal teenager alone in an apartment. You think that's tough love?" Her husband chimed in from the background saying, "You abandoned your kid. Stop hiding behind fancy phrases." I hung up on them, but their words wouldn't leave my head. I thought they were being unfair. But then I realized no one in the family had ever actually agreed with our decision. They had just been too uncomfortable, too shocked, or too afraid of confrontation to call us out directly. I tried to reach out to Tyler after that, not with a phone call. He's blocked our numbers. I wrote him an email, a long one, not begging, not guilt-tripping, but trying to explain where my head had been. I told him I was sorry he went through so much alone. I told him I never wanted him to feel abandoned. I tried to take ownership without rewriting the past. I didn't expect a detailed response, and I didn't get one. He replied with a single line, "I'm glad you're safe, but I don't need you in my life." I cried when I read it, but not in the dramatic, poor me way. It was more like something in my chest finally cracked under a pressure I had been ignoring for years. I wanted to lash out. I wanted to say he was being unfair, but for the first time, I didn't. I closed the laptop and sat with it. Later that night, Mark started ranting again about how Tyler was ungrateful and punishing us, how we were right to do what we did, how Tyler turned out successful because of our decision. I couldn't listen to it anymore. I told him point blank that we destroyed our family. Not Tyler. Not my sister. Not CPS. Us. We did it. For the first time, I heard myself say it out loud. It didn't kill me. It didn't absolve anything either. But it was honest. The truth is, I finally understand Tyler's perspective. He didn't interpret what we did as parenting. He saw it as abandonment because that's exactly what it was. I don't know where to go from here. I don't know if trying again would help or hurt him. I don't know if leaving him alone is the right thing or just another way of running away, but I understand, maybe for the first time in my life, why he refuses to contact me, why he cut us out completely, why the life he built has no space for us. I thought tough love meant forcing him to grow. All we forced him to do was survive without parents. Final update. I didn't expect anything to come out of posting here. I thought maybe people would call me names. Maybe a few would defend me, and I'd close the tab and pretend it never happened. Instead, everything in my life shifted after reading the comments, getting the letter from Tyler, and finally sitting with the reality of our choices. This update is not some redemption arc. It isn't a story about reconciliation. It's just where things ended up after the dust settled and I stopped pretending I was the victim. After the last update, I started therapy. Not because anyone forced me, and not because I wanted brownie points. I went because for the first time, I couldn't ignore the fact that Tyler's letter wasn't an exaggeration. It wasn't spite. It was a factual timeline of what our decision forced him to go through. When I read the comments here, I realized how warped my idea of parenting had become. I had spent years convincing myself that obedience meant success. My therapist told me on our second session, "You didn't want a child who struggled. You wanted a child who didn't inconvenience you with his struggle." I sat there feeling like someone had ripped open a box I had duct taped shut for 12 years. I admitted things I'd never said out loud before, that I had been embarrassed by Tyler's depression, that I saw his sleeping and moodiness as defiance instead of symptoms, that I resented how hard parenting was and wanted him to shape up so my life would calm down. I admitted that sometimes I felt like he was ruining our marriage, even though our marriage was already crumbling under Mark's refusal to acknowledge anything emotional. The hardest part was accepting that Tyler didn't survive because of us. He survived in spite of us. He built every piece of his adult life without us holding even one corner of the foundation. When that finally landed, I cried in a way I haven't cried since I was a kid. Meanwhile, Mark refused therapy completely. He said apologies reward bad behavior. He said Tyler was manipulating me with his sob story. He told me I was letting strangers on the internet brainwash me. We had multiple arguments where he refused to acknowledge any wrongdoing. I didn't expect him to change, but hearing him talk about Tyler like he was still a disrespectful teenager made me see our marriage differently. I realized I had spent years bending around his rigidity, following his lead because it was easier than fighting. I thought we were a united front. We were just mutually stubborn. After a few weeks of therapy, I moved into the guest room. There wasn't a dramatic blow-up. It just became clear that staying in a marriage with someone who thought abandonment was a parenting skill was going to keep me stuck in the same mindset that broke my family in the first place. Mark barely reacted. He said something like, "Do whatever you need to feel better about yourself." That was his way of saying he wasn't going to change. Not long after that, I got a message from Tyler's fiancée. It wasn't hostile or emotional. It was practical. "Please, stop trying to force reconciliation. Tyler has healed without you. Let him choose peace." I stared at the message for a long time. I realized I had been trying to earn a relationship with him like it was a reward I could unlock if I showed enough remorse. I didn't think I was doing that, but I was. I was treating him like someone who owed me conversation or acknowledgement. He didn't. He doesn't. The message helped clarify something I had been resisting for years. Tyler wasn't cutting me out to punish me. He was cutting me out to protect himself. A month later, I filed for a legal separation from Mark. I told him I couldn't keep living beside someone who believed abandoning our child was the correct decision. I told him I wasn't blaming him for everything, but I also wasn't pretending anymore that I was a passenger in the decision. I signed my name on the note we left for Tyler. I packed the boxes. I turned the key in the ignition. I wasn't forced. I was complicit. Mark didn't fight me. He didn't even ask me to stay. That told me everything I needed to know about our marriage. We hadn't been partners in years. We had been two stubborn people clinging to the illusion that we were right. Then something unexpected happened. Tyler reached out. Not with an invitation. Not with reconciliation. Just a short message. Thanks for respecting my boundary. I wish you well. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cold. It was neutral. Mature. Final, in a way that didn't feel hateful. It felt like closure, even if it wasn't the closure I used to fantasize about. There was no, "Mom, I forgive you." There was no open door. But there was acknowledgement, and after 12 years of silence, that meant something. I cried when I read it, but it wasn't the same suffocating self-pity as before. It was sadness mixed with acceptance. The family fallout is still ongoing. Some relatives still won't speak to me. Others have softened a bit after seeing that I'm not defending myself or rewriting the story. I don't argue anymore when people say we abandoned him. I don't try to fix their perception. I don't try to make excuses. It happened. I own it. My therapist told me something last week that stuck with me. She said, "Repair is not always reunion. Sometimes repair is the work you do alone." I didn't understand it at first. I do now. My relationship with Tyler is not going to be repaired in the traditional sense. There will be no holidays together, no late-night phone calls, no mother of the groom role at his wedding. The repair is internal. It's me facing the kind of parent I was and choosing to be better with the time I have left. I've made other changes too. I've apologized to people I dismissed or hurt over the years. I've started showing up differently at work. I've stopped expecting praise for basic accountability. I'm working on myself because I owe that to the world around me, whether or not Tyler ever speaks to me again. And yes, I still hope things might thaw one day. Not out of entitlement, but because I would like to someday earn a different place in his story. But I'm not banking on it. I'm not waiting for it like a prize. I'm not measuring my growth by whether he chooses to let me back in. He doesn't owe me anything. Not contact, not forgiveness, not closure, not explanations. He built a life that doesn't include me, and he's allowed to protect that life. My job now is not to claw my way back into it. My job is to accept the consequences of my choices and try to be someone who would never repeat them. We didn't lose our child, we abandoned him, and he built a life where we don't fit. I accept that without demanding he carry the weight of our choices.